So this morning, we continue our focus on the interventions being made in the fight against gender-based violence and femicide in South Africa. Now, it's been 3 years since President Cyril Ramaphosa launched the National Strategic Plan on Gender-Based Violence and Femicide. The plan was anchored by 5 key interventions to be implemented, including urgently responding to victims and survivors of gender-based violence, as well as broadening access to justice for survivors. But how much have the victims of gender-based violence benefited from this? So to help us talk to this and find out, we're joined virtually by Advocate Brenda Madumise-Pajibo, who's the Director at Wise for Africa. Advocate, thanks so much for your time. Welcome to Morning Live.
Good morning, Sakina.
So you co-chaired the Interim Steering Committee on Gender-Based Violence and Femicide. And we do know that that, of course, comprised of government, civil society and other partners, such as developmental partners, researchers and scientists. And there was a declaration that was signed, which, of course, gave birth to the National Strategic Plan on Gender-Based Violence and Femicide. So how far have we come? What are your thoughts on some of the interventions that have been made since this was launched by President Cyril Ramaphosa in 2020?
That was a starting point. So we're starting on a very positive base by having a plan that we should all rally behind, right? What was missing out of that plan was the matching budget to be able to execute the 6 pillars that you find in the strategic plan. So that's what we have been struggling with, to ensure that you have a match budget, so that once you start your prevention strategies or interventions and you work on your justice interventions, they can support economic power of women, research and data management, that all of that work in sync and in unison. At the moment, what is happening is that you have, less on prevention. I mean, we have not spent efforts and time and resources on prevention strategies. What we have been doing is to respond and react after the fact, right? So most of our time and effort and resources go towards the criminal justice system. It goes towards the care and support of victims and survivors, not adequately, but there is something happening there. There is not much on the research, because research informs your intervention. So we are not putting any resources around that. You then have economic power, and if you recall the President's speech on 9th of August this year, it was exclusively about economic empowerment of women, and we still need to see the results of all those interventions that I spoke about.
Interesting points that you raised there, Advocate, because we also remember President Ramaphosa announcing that government departments had actually rallied around that plan, and that an amount of 1.6 billion rand was sourced through budget reprioritization. So when you say that, we are still, struggling, what have these funds actually been used for? Did they reach the intended beneficiaries and organizations?
So what happened, and we need to, and I'm hoping that at some point SABC can have a round table around that 1.6 billion for us to literally go through line by line of this money that was committed, and remember, it was not new money; it was reprioritization of budget. So, and I also want to remind all of us that when that announcement was made, it was made at the back of the UN in Cape Town. Remember, the president was at the WEF summit in Cape Town, and he came out because there was protest of women from UCT, UWC, and all the surrounding areas. And then he announced that there's going to be this emergency response plan, and the 1.6 billion will go towards that. There was no plan on how that 1.6 billion should be expended. The Interim Steering Committee had to draft an emergency response action plan, which we did. And if you look at that emergency response plan, you'll see the CGE, you'll see us as West Africa. We did a report card on what happened to that plan and the allocated funding. There hasn't been a proper accounting of that money, because remember, the monies were going towards different interventions: police, Justice Department, and funding of NGOs that are working in this environment. I can safely say to you this morning, Sakina, that there was money allocated to NGOs that came from Department of Social Development and were disbursed through the NGA. There was also money that was disbursed by Solidarity Fund towards the NGOs. But we have not fully accounted as Africans, and especially government department through the president, the entire 1.6 billion, how it was expended, so that people can see that the money went to the intended interventions as it was set out.
And I think we may just take you up on that challenge of having that roundtable discussion, because I think it's very important, because too often we don't necessarily follow up on the commitments that were made and, as you say, how the money ultimately gets dispersed. Advocate Madumise-Pajibo, the strategic plan also focused on 6 pillars of interventions, and importantly, that included some of the support work that was to be done by the Thuthuzela care centers. And we know that we went to some outside broadcasts where we had a look at some of these Thuthuzela care centers that had been refurbished. But of course, there aren't enough of those, are there?
No, not at all. And that's another project for you, Sakina, at the SABC. Thuthuzela centers is a good intervention and a good project to do. It was done by the funders. They believe that a one-stop service is critical, and we can see the work that they do. They do outstanding work, right? They must be supported. The funding, the initial funding for those Thuthuzela centers came from the funders. They were supposed to be taken over by ourselves, the South African government, and continue to fund. I mean, it was a struggle once the funding dried up to ensure that they continue to provide the service at the level that is required. So that still continues. And plans are afoot to make sure that we have as many as we can. But we need to give them funding for them to operate optimally and to be at every locality that we think of. And there's also jurisdictional issues, whether they should stay with Department of Justice or they must be moved to health. And I think justice has won the fight. They will remain with the Department of Justice, but they must allocate the funding. They must ensure that they put all the case has been made. Coming out of the second presidential summit on gender-based violence and femicide last in November, there's a push for more Thuthuzela care centers to be built in and around the country.
Advocate, we have to leave it there, but I tell you what, some interesting challenges that you've put to us. We certainly will take that up, and we'll be in touch with you. Also, speaking to who else should form part of this discussion. But thank you so much for your time. Advocate Brenda Madumise-Pajibo was the director for WISE for Africa, talking to us about the National Strategic Plan on Gender-Based Violence and Femicide and how it has assisted victims of gender-based violence, and raising some very interesting points, did the advocate there. And if you'll remember, I was actually looking at this in the State of the Nation address. President Cyril Ramaphosa said that around 21 billion rand had been dedicated over the medium term to be implemented on these 6 pillars of the plan, including the economic empowerment of women. But as the advocate said, we need to find out whether that money actually reached its intended targets. That's a roundtable discussion that we'll start working on here on Morning Live.